There is a question that keeps certain people in Washington awake at night. Not the loud questions, not the ones shouted across cable news or debated in crowded Senate chambers. The quiet ones, the ones buried inside classified folders, hidden behind security clearances most Americans don't know exist. And in 2025, one of those quiet questions became impossible to ignore. What if the government was listening, not to terrorists, not to foreign agents, but to you? This is not speculation. This is not a theory assembled from shadows. What unfolded inside the National Security Agency in 2025 was documented, flagged internally, and for a time deliberately suppressed. And the story of how it began to surface is more chilling than anything you were told about on the evening news. To understand what happened, you need to understand the legal machinery that made it possible. Section 702 of the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act was designed to allow U.S. intelligence agencies to monitor foreign targets on foreign soil. A reasonable tool built for a dangerous world. But buried inside that authority is a mechanism called incidental collection, the capturing of American citizens' communications when those citizens happen to interact with foreign targets. On paper, it sounds like an unavoidable side effect. In practice, by 2025, it had become something else entirely. Someone inside the NSA already knew the danger. A senior compliance officer raised formal objections in the spring of 2025. The concerns were logged, they were acknowledged. And then, according to accounts that later emerged through congressional testimony, they were quietly set aside. The program continued, the collection expanded, and above it all, a legal framework stretched just far enough to remain technically permissible, provided cover for the entire operation. What was hidden from the public was the scale. Internal compliance documents, portions of which became the subject of fierce legal disputes, suggested that the volume of American citizens' private communications being collected had grown to a staggering degree. Emails, phone records, text messages, financial metadata. Not the data of suspects, not persons under investigation. Ordinary Americans, swept into a digital dragnet that operated largely beyond their knowledge and almost entirely beyond their ability to challenge it. The response from the intelligence community when questions began to surface was not transparency, it was containment. Briefings were restricted to only the most senior congressional members. Documents that had existed in legal gray zones were reclassified, and the act of asking how many Americans were affected, that question itself, was framed as a potential threat to national security. Think about what that means. Asking who was being watched was considered dangerous. The Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court, the body responsible for authorizing these programs, operates entirely in secret. No opposing counsel, no public record, no accountability visible to the citizens whose lives and communications fall within its jurisdiction. When compliance violations were identified inside NSA systems, they were reported to this court. The court issued guidance, and the machinery kept running. By mid-2025, fragments of the internal dispute had reached a small number of Senate Intelligence Committee staffers and a handful of investigative journalists. What followed was a battle fought mostly out of public view between those demanding answers and those controlling what answers could legally be given. Intelligence officials testified before Congress with language carefully engineered to illuminate as little as possible. The word safeguards appeared in nearly every statement. The word millions did not. But the truth was far darker than the official testimony suggested, because this was not the first time. After Edward Snowden exposed the NSA's mass surveillance programs in 2013, the American public was promised reform, oversight, accountability. The system, they were told, had been fixed, and for a time, people believed it. What 2025 revealed, quietly, without the drama of a single explosive leak, was that the fixing had been incomplete. That the appetite of a surveillance infrastructure, once built, does not shrink easily. That legal language written in classified rooms by people accountable to almost no one has a way of expanding to fill whatever space it is given. Section 702 was reauthorized. The program continued. The modifications attached to the renewal were celebrated by some as meaningful reform and dismissed by others as precisely nothing. And somewhere inside a secured government facility, the servers kept running, the data kept accumulating, the questions kept going unanswered. How much of your life is already stored somewhere you will never be allowed to see? A pattern, a system operating at a scale its own overseers struggled to fully account for. A legal structure designed more to enable than to restrain. And a public kept just informed enough to feel reassured, but never quite informed enough to know the truth. The NSA was not watching your enemies. It was watching the space between you and everyone you've ever contacted and calling it something else.
And somewhere in Washington, someone who knows exactly how deep this goes is still deciding how much you're allowed to find out.